So in section 25, Husserl notes, and we can start this and then I'll do 25 and 26, see if there are further questions, and then proceed for the rest of the third meditation. So Husserl notes that the differences in the way that the object shows itself as being or as non-being correspond to another difference throughout consciousness. This is on page 58. Quote, the difference namely between actuality and fantasy or as if actuality. What the German actually says is not that, as Cairns translates it, the differences in the object with respect to being occur on account of the differences in the status of actuality. And this may be what you were mentioning, Christos. Rather, Husserl says that the differences with respect to being spalten sich, or split themselves, in parallele Vermoge, or in a parallel way, with the differences in consciousness between actuality and fantasy. What is important to note here is that there are differences that present themselves originarily. Difference is a rule of perceptibility and interrelation, and the difference in the modes of givenness of being form a parallel with the difference in the modes of actuality. Out of the difference between being and non-being, insofar as it is taken up as related to the difference between actuality and fantasy, we get and again on page 58, quote, new universal concept of possibility. The concept of possibility, and this is the bottom of 58 to 59, quote, repeats in modified form all the modes of being. This repetition is not a simple repetition. It is a repetition of being and non-being within, quote, non-actualities. Page 59. I fantasize a rabbit as real if I am the boy in the nursery in the Velveteen Rabbit. And this means that the notion of the being real of the rabbit in my room is experienced within the act of fantasizing this stuffed animal as real. Husserl talks about the correlative, quote, modes of consciousness, page 59, as those of, quote, positionality and those of quasi-positionality. I posit the rabbit outside, hopping around, as real within actual perception. I posit the stuffed rabbit in the nursery as real within fantasy. And the attribution of reality, the experience of reality in the rabbit as my friend, my confidant, etc., in the nursery, remains within the realm of the as-if. The difference between actuality and fantasy, which indicates a difference between the appearance of the being or non-being of the object, brings us immediately to a difference between the functions of evidence in each case. Evidence differs itself. What sustains my experience of the rabbit in the garden is not what sustains my experience of the rabbit in the nursery. Quote, to each of these modes there correspond both a particular mode of evidence of its meant object in the appropriate mode of being, and the potentialities of making objects evident. It's page 59. While it is true that our action of clarification of what presents itself as real or as quasi-real is the same in its essential structure, that is, while we attempt to clarify the givenness of the rabbit as real in both cases, the manner in which we do so, perhaps as Christos said, participate in it, varies. The essential structure is this. We lay, quote, this is 59, a synthetic course from an unclear intending to a corresponding prefigurative intuition, vorverbildlich enden Anschauung, namely one that implicitly contains, in sich tragt, bears in itself, the sense. The burning of the nursery bedding, the throwing away of the stuffed rabbit, the intervention of the fairy, allows for the rabbit to recognize its own reality and its freedom. The boy cannot move from the as-if positing of the fantasized possible being of the rabbit to the full positing of the perceived same rabbit until the rabbit disappears. There is a forced change of mode of consciousness, of mode of positionality, due to the major change in the boy, in the nursery, and in the rabbit. There is no going back in this story. Quasi-positionality is different from positionality. Fantasy is different from perception. The modes of evidence and the method of fulfillment in the prefigurative intuition is different in each case. Now I'll talk about 26. Husserl admits that talking about actuality and quasi-actuality looks like he is doing a logical account of consciousness. He is drawing out the cognition of possibility from being, drawing a distinction between the method of acquiring evidence in each case. However, Husserl emphasizes that the logical origin of concepts within intentionality is not the result of abstract thinking. This will go towards Olga's question of the a priori. Rather, the origin is phenomenological and arises within the discovery of the differences between the manners of givenness of objects as presenting itself. Quote, this is 59, the phenomenological origin of the principles and fundamental concepts of formal logic are indicated by these brief observations. In other words, logic originates within phenomenology. So phenomenology is what allows logic to show up. The difference in the modes of givenness point to the origin of the concepts, but the concepts for their part also, this is page 59, quote, point to a universal conformity to laws of structure on the part of conscious life. Logic does not simply arise within the modes of givenness. Logic shows itself as the very interplay of modes of givenness and modes of intuition, perception, fantasy. Logic is the very structure of intentionality as it explicates itself. Consciousness then does not just discover its concepts within the givenness of its objects, though it certainly does. Consciousness reveals itself to have always already lived its life by means of these concepts that it discovers. We are always already engaged within the concepts. We are, quote, regular. And as regular, quote, truth and actuality have and are able to have sense for us. 59. The experience of something as appearing as actual, then, is an experience of always already being engaged with, quote, a course of evident identifying synthesis. That was 59. That does not, quote, lead to conflict with an evident datum or gegebenum, an evident given. Page 60. This lack of conflict is what allows the thing as given to present itself as, quote, rightful or true actuality. So, in other words, actuality, going back to Marvin and Christos's discussion, actuality is in a sense the lack of conflict between the given and the regularity of consciousness and its modes of taking up the given. So it's a lack of conflict in that interrelationship. In fact, Husserl does not say that our synthesis, quote, presents rightful or true actuality itself, page 60. What he does say is, and I'm quoting the German here, so it's a very long German sentence, and my German is horrible. I'm not going to read the whole sentence. The translator says that we present actuality. Husserl says that we are able to be within reality, Wirklichseins, through direkte oder wahre Wirklichkeit selbstgebende Synthesis. As I read this, we are only certain of reality through the right or true synthesis, in which reality gives itself to our evident confirmation. The synthesis does not do the work of actuality. It allows reality to present itself, to give itself to our process of confirmation. This is not a difference that makes no difference. Rather, it suggests that the binding together of concept and experience, actuality and evidence, is an intentional intertwining of subject and object. The claim to being actual or real, or quasi-actual or fantasized, that an object makes, that is, the character of the object's appearing, must have, quote, sense for us, page 60. It has this sense only if its manner of appearance is given within a co-functioning synthesis of confirmation. Actuality is thus a character that arises in the mode of belonging within a temporally deployed function of consciousness as holding diverse things together, or synthesis. The intertwining of sense and being is the very function and activity of transcendental subjectivity. We are the union of the manner of appearing and the character of synthesis. There is not the abandonment of being for meaning, nor is there nothing of being within meaning. Rather, the field of transcendental subjectivity is the forest in which the tree both falls and is heard to fall. That's the stupid thing about if there's no one there to hear it, does a tree fall in the forest? That's a thing. Our process of confirming, our attempt to produce an adequate link between what we mean and what is, as in the case of the medieval slogan adequatio re et intellectus, is simply the intertwining of givenness and synthesis. Adequation is really the process of discovery. It is not the barren and abstract field of proof. All right, so that was 25 and 26, and I can keep going, but since we had such a lively initial series of questions, I just wanted to stop and see what you think of that before we go on, if you want to say anything at all, and you don't have to.
Well, thank you for that. That was helpful. So yeah, that really emphasizes to me that the actuality is dependent on a consistent and ongoing relationship of evidences to make the claim of actuality. So I feel more at ease about it because it's not nearly a metaphysical claim. It's a kind of a perceptual and cognitive. Although he has this thing about the object presenting, but I mean it's still consistent with a kind of a more modern cognitive psychology view of processing and subconscious processes and so on.
Olga, go ahead.
Peter, first of all, thank you very much for reading the chapter this way in such precision. So how did Husserl come up with this description?
I think he's still working at the level of the eidetic here, as he's about to say towards the end of the third and the beginning of the fourth meditation. I think this is just, now this book is after the ideas, right? So this is really the compressed expression of all of the things that he's been working since 1898 or whatever to do. And so I think this is just him spelling out how at all moments of experience with whatever character that we're focusing on, it is a relation of consciousness to its intended object. There is nothing about reality or logic or whatever we're talking about that does not come from an always already intertwining play between what gives itself, or as Marvin just said, what presents itself, and my own way of taking up or positing that presentation or appearance or givenness. So it's just Husserl is coming up with this because his fundamental recognition, I don't even want to say claim, his fundamental recognition is that we're never separate. There is no consciousness without consciousness of. And that's just unpacking it all the way through, which is why the idea that logic comes out of phenomenology is so important, right? So all of the S is P and all of the stuff that you think about as formal logic, like that's derivative from the most important logic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
I got that, but what I don't understand, and excuse me if I'm overkilling it, but I'm really struggling with it. Passive syntheses are invisible. Okay.
are
They
what? Invisible?
invisible, yes, they're precognitive.
That won't be true in the fifth meditation with pairing.
That is what I'm trying to highlight, and that's why I'm asking the question, because in ordinary perception or in ordinary consciousness, there is this flow, the flux of experiences which are organized in some reasonable logic manner, but passive synthesis, they do not come to the surface. So he was able to conduct such degree or quality of epoche that the precognitive, absolutely precognitive processes become visible. And then on top of that, he's able to derive eidetics out of this field now exposed. It seems astounding, you know. I'm smiling because I'm trying to reproduce the steps in me. Maybe I can sustain like a minute at the most of attention, which is required for this. And then I'm back into the flow of experiences as it's normally given. So that's why it seems again and again that this whole picture of passive synthesis is an inference. I of
And
some sorts, you know, it seems like a theory, and I have to force myself again and again to justify. Yeah.
so not everything is going to have the same character or the same process of fulfillment. So everything will be a synthesis of fulfillment, active synthesis and passive. But the passive synthesis cannot be fulfilled merely actively, or it would not function, right? So the kind of proof, quote unquote proof, of passive synthesis is going to be rather peripheral. You're going to catch it as it's already underway or in the process of it having just finished or something like that. So looking forward to the fifth meditation, pairing is like, and I've used this story many times in the gospel where Jesus feels the power leaving his body by the woman with the hemorrhage who touches the fringes of his garment, right? And he said, "Who touched me?" It's that passive leaving of power. He can't really put his finger on what is happening, but he realizes in the midst of it ending that it's been happening, right? So that level of evidence is very different from you finishing a sentence. There is passive synthesis in your ability to finish a sentence that you've started, but you have so many habits built in over so many years, especially if I'm speaking English as a second language. I'm even more attentive. But you have so many built-in powers of habit that even that isn't quite passive enough to be called passive synthesis. So I'm not disagreeing with you, but I am saying we can't hold passive synthesis to the same level of accountability that we would hold active synthesis. It simply wouldn't be passive if it fully offered to us everything that it is doing. And so we trace it out. And I think that's where Derrida talks about trace and where Merleau-Ponty talks about anonymous subjectivity happening in desire and movement, which are themselves intentional, but they are not actively transparent to the body or the person who is doing them. So I think all of this later stuff on trace and body and desire, that all comes out of Husserl's recognition. And what I hear you saying is you don't want to downplay passive synthesis because it seems so incredibly important that Husserl was able to do it. And I think you're absolutely right. So nothing that you've said is it's all very helpful, and I think it's right. I will say one thing in response to this. Husserl, I take it, is taking up something that was very important for Kant. The as if, als ob, right, was very important for Kant in a number of ways for his own critical philosophy. The example that I'll give you is in the third critique, where he talks about beauty as if in the object, when in reality it is only the free play of the imagination and the understanding happening simply in the subject. So that is a kind of, if you will, passive synthesis in which the imagination and the understanding are not reducing one to the other, but are in free play. And we don't quite grasp that, but Kant is using this as if in the object when we already know it's not in the object. He's using that to carve out the ability of the subject to feel herself or himself in that ratio of their own powers. I think Husserl is doing something very similar by means of discerning the difference between Wirklichkeit and quasi-Wirklichkeit, right? The as if. He is saying, look at the difference that's present within your own conscious life, and that is going to be the key to understanding how passive synthesis is happening, even if you can't completely grasp it in its evidence. Welcome, Jeremy. I'm glad you came, and you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't quite get the very last thing you said there about as if is the key to grasping passive synthesis.
So if we don't have a distinction between, and I'm just trying this out now, I haven't come to this except through Olga, your point, but if we don't have within us the ability to discern the difference between actuality and quasi-actuality, then we don't have the ability to discern the difference between modes of evidence, I guess. And passive synthesis depends on its working and on its being noticed by us if we can discern the difference between the modes of evidence by which it fulfills itself or by which it occurs.
Because passive synthesis itself is always involved in what a certain mode of evidence is.
Yes.
Well, and one thing Olga reminded me of, Olga, you said that you were struggling to just focus on passive synthesis, but you could only do it for about a minute. And I think, I don't know, maybe just a hint, which is, I don't think, when talking about the phenomenological reduction, for example, I don't think he meant we were supposed to try to imagine what it would be like if we didn't believe the world existed or if the world didn't exist. It's more like we can't stop believing the world exists. He doesn't say we should try to stop doing that. I think it's more of allowing something that it was always in the background to be noticed by you. And so passive synthesis would be an example of that too. For example, we can deliberately remember something, but time is and retentions are always accumulating, and we don't actively do that. the very flow of time is passive synthesis. And that's something we can notice, even though for most of the time we are not directed toward that. But Husserl believes one thing he does believe apparently about passive synthesis is it can be objectively grasped and analyzed, for example, and that is based on intuition. It's not an inference or a theory of some kind. I don't know if that's helpful, but it just kind of reminds me that I first started studying phenomenology and I was trying to do that, trying to imagine what it would be like if the world didn't exist. And just trying to do that, and I couldn't do it. But I think I was missing the point. So,
Jeremy, thanks. It is helpful, but just to clarify, I don't have a doubt in existence of the world or in knowability of the world. Where the doubt is in differentiating between perceptual and conceptual aspect of verification. So is passive synthesis or the processes of passive synthesis visible in the same manner I'm able to see the logical steps in my mind? For example, I'll give an example. If we just actually discussed it with Mohammed to a degree, but I'll say again, if we are to create a computer which duplicates the working of the human mind, we can break into minuscule steps the logical operations. Can we break likewise passive synthesis into minuscule logically available steps? Let me just finish and program it. The ordinary logical functioning of the mind, we can program because we can see intuitively, step by step, all these little elements of logic which lead to certain outcome. But in the passive synthesis, the way Husserl describes it, they are also logically, theoretically expressed. So this logical, theoretical expression of the processes of synthesis, can they be traced in the manner we trace the operation of concatenations of logic in ourselves? And then, there is a big question: what in passive synthesis is intuited and what is the result of transcendental deduction, meaning of the functioning, of operating of the a priori. So what Peter tells me, as I understand, is that everything which is describing passive synthesis is seen by Husserl, is intuited by him directly in his first-person consciousness. It's not a result of theory building which precedes this intuition, but it's a descriptive method which sees and describes this synthesis which are a priori, but they're happening in me, they're operating in me right now. And that is something that I'm trying to come to terms with. So this lecture, when Peter kind of unpacks it in so many ways again and again and again, this is helpful. But it's a difficult, because there is always theory building in science. It's always taking place. And it's nothing of the kind that we see, or I see in this text.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, sorry I missed what you introduced at the beginning, but just my reaction to what you're saying, Olga, is I think that what Husserl is dealing with here is he's asking a question. I think Peter mentioned this. How do we know logic applies to reality? How do we can deal with concepts isolated? How do we know that has anything to do at all with real things?
No,
There's a great
okay.
deal, and he finds it rooted in perception. He believes logic is rooted in
I
perception.
understand that.
Perception is prior to logic.
I understand that.
And
Yeah, I understand that aspect. Yeah. I understand
in
the
perception, there's
logic, but
both active and passive synthesis in perception.
well, I don't object to any of what he says. I'm trying to understand how he obtained the possibility to say what he says. What was his method? That's the question.
I think if you hold on to that question as we keep going, you'll see that the method builds across the discovery, if you will, of the transcendental ego. But what I will say in acknowledgement to what you and Jeremy are talking about is that I find it ultimately, if we take the brain or consciousness as separate, and we have to be very careful. We may not doubt that we are, in fact, always implicated in the world, always interrelated with object, that we may take intentionality as the truth. And yet, um, we see the evidence of passive synthesis as not answering to either binary option. Who is doing it? Is it me or is it the thing? There is no binary answer, right? So if you're listening to a song, you don't have the whole song until the song is over.
Mhm.
How is it that you are able to hear the melody when really what you have is a series of dying notes, right? You have this note that's dying, and then you have the next note that's dying, and really it's just, how is it that you can hear the song? Is it coming from the notes? Is it coming from you? And in reality, neither is true, or rather, both are true. What is happening is that the passive synthesis of holding the diversity of the notes together, that is what synthesis is. That is what you're doing. But you can't catch yourself processing the melody as it's happening.
Oh, I
Also,
see.
the
Okay.
notes themselves have to have, and this is why music majors can study Beethoven and look at all the, the ways that chords resolve into other chords. Like, they're not wrong to look at the actual relations between chords and notes and notice things, right, about sort of independently of their consciousness, how these notes are functioning together. They're not wrong to do that. But neither on the side of the notes nor on the side of the human being is passive synthesis simply occurring. It is in the interconnection, which is why creating an artificial brain is never going to be adequate to a phenomenological account of what consciousness is, because consciousness is not, in any sense, the separation from the world. Consciousness and passive synthesis are the expression of the intertwining that names intentionality. This is why passive synthesis is so important to Husserl, because although Jeremy's right, we're doing it in time consciousness, we also can't catch ourselves producing the transitions between the moments or giving ourselves time consciousness anonymously for us then to reflect on in these momentary bouts of phenomenological practice. We end up concluding in this indirect way that I must be making time happen internally without actually being able to catch ourselves as the anonymous time consciousness that is, in fact, pushing time out of myself. So all of this discussion is true. The problem is, Olga's problem doesn't go away. You're never going to be able to adequately bring forward to your own recognition what you're doing in passive synthesis. There just simply is no other choice, and you live it in the things you're doing. So there's no other choice but to say, I am entwined in a situation So it's really the situation of me and my engagement that is passive synthesis, right? It's not that I'm bringing this to the world. It's that me and the world are intertwined, and this is how passive synthesis works.
So the degree of fulfillment will be less in this, or it will be as clear. I see.
The degree of
I think
fulfillment is
you
the
agree.
success of the listening or the success of the pairing or whatever. The degree of fulfillment just is. And so yeah, one more thing, and I'm sorry we do need to, well, I need to go right at 2 o'clock, but oh, I lost it. I was going to say something. Oh, well, doesn't matter. Go ahead, Olga.
No, just thank you. Yeah, it's really, I think that this last round kind of brought it home. Mhm.
Christos, yes.
Well, I'm still thinking about it all. There were two things that came to my mind. I don't know if they're maybe too analytical or too psychological. As we were talking about what Olga, as you were talking about this kind of interconnections, I was thinking of this kind of Russellian atomicity, this kind of making sense by discrete finite elements, and how maybe there's something more continuous in this passive synthesis, maybe, but I don't know if I heard it correctly. And then the second thing that I was kind of thinking about, and I'm still kind of mulling over, is actuality as an absence of conflict or a lack of conflict. And I was just curious, does that presuppose a split of world and self? And I was thinking of cognitive dissonance in its original kind of take, where, echoing the Velveteen Rabbit, one can make real what one is not. Like, one can imagine something and feel the dissonance between one's fantasy, if you'd like, and what's going on in the world. And yet through work, one can bridge that either by adapting oneself or by adapting the world or something like that. I don't know if that's there to surface notions given what we've been talking, but I just wanted to bring them up because I thought about it.
Thank you. So I'll just keep continuing. And Jeremy, we did talk about the Velveteen Rabbit as a way of discussing the difference between reality and quasi-reality, the real rabbit versus the stuffed rabbit. But maybe I can continue and talk about what it means to experience a storm in terms of the next section, because I think what's really at stake in passive synthesis is the recognition of what later phenomenologists are going to call the event, what Heidegger might call Ereignis or happening, right? When we say we can see what is happening, or we can notice that something is happening, even if we can't point exactly to it, I think passive synthesis is in some sense, sensitivity to event as such. So this is 27. Husserl clarifies this last point of section 26 in this section. This is a quote on page 60. The identity of any meant object as meant is not a really intrinsic moment of the transient conscious process of evidence and verification. That's on page 60. The identity of the object, in other words, is not a piece of the conscious activity. It is not reduced to the activity I do. Neither is the, quote, identity constituted in the adequation of the meant as such and the truly existed. So again, no adequatio intellectus et re. That's not where we are. My recognition, in other words, that's what I take constitution to mean, Olga, in your initial question. My recognition that what I mean is what truly exists, that meaning and being are correlative, which is what I think Jeremy was saying earlier, is not simply a byproduct, an epiphenomenon, or a part of the process of synthesis and verification. Rather, the object in its identity, its truth or reality as making sense to us throughout the course of this verification process across the time of our attention and reflection. This is, quote, an ideal immanence, internal. It is within our consciousness, within the synthetic and confirming activity, but it, the real, the evident, is in there by means of escaping into our future and past. To experience the rain on one's face and hear the thunder and see the gathering clouds is to experience the event of the storm. The feelings and sights and sounds give the storm as really happening now. The meaning of the storm gives itself through and by means of the perceptions as real and true. But this intertwining of meaning, water on my cheek, etc., and truth, intertwining of meaning and truth, this is really happening now, only continues to preserve itself by means of past and future acts of mine. The actuality of the object as I perceive and confirm it then is, quote, an abiding possession, bleibende Habe, or a having, Habe, that remains, bleiben, and thus that sustains itself across, quote, new evidences as restitutions of the first evidence. It's page 60. As long as the storm presents itself, I see the link between what the storm means and its happening as this event here and now that I confirm has the right and true weight of something to respect and perhaps fear and act upon. As Husserl says, the link between meaning and being must be maintained in order for being to appear at all. Quote, without such possibilities, page 60, there would be for us no fixed and abiding being, stehendes und bleibendes Sein, no real and no ideal world, end quote. Without a possibility of my own to repeat the process of evidences of the storm as it unfolds, there is no being of the storm. The remaining having of the storm entails the remaining being. Just as the noesis and noema must be described on each side within a parallel structure, so too the description of meaning and being, of object and evidence, of appearance or givenness and synthesis. These are all pairs within a coupling that must be taken as a whole. Evidence, then, is the way in which the thing's relation to me and its being in relation to meaning that I am responsible for is repeatable. Evidence is the very possibility of repetition and of that repetition being reactivated across time. One piece of evidence, say of clouds on the horizon, quote, does not as yet produce for us any abiding being. Ever been out in the Midwest? Clouds on the horizon don't necessarily mean anything, right? Being does not announce itself to us with any urgency when the clouds first show up. It does not yet matter to us in the way it will when the thunder rolls and the drops fall. With the clouds, the storm is yet on the horizon, a matter of something that might well happen, but that is not yet. With the first clouds on the horizon, there is a certain separation still between the thing, the in itself, and me, the for me. My attention is not yet commanded to reckon with the storm. But the first clouds do start the passive intertwining between being and meaning that is familiar to me, even if uncritically, as the process of the way that things matter to me as requiring my attention, as remaining in being within a remaining in having. When I have to turn to the storm, it has always already been referring me not to, quote, a de facto experience, Erlebnis Tatsache, of the initial clouds, but rather to certain potentialities which are grounded, as Husserl says, in the transcendental ego and its life. I'm going to emphasize that last word about life. I live into the storm, as it were, And I do so by means of, quote, the potentiality of the infinity of intendings, end quote, that the gathering of the storm permits. I can look here and there, feel the drop of the temperature, the brush of the wind's increasing intensity, the first drops on my cheek. Not just here either. I depend not just on the synthesis of the sights and sounds and feelings, even smells or tastes, but also the way in which any event as such presents, has presented, and can present itself. I am already familiar with the course of what it means to happen. I have seen the happening of happening. I am already familiar with the link between the remaining of having, I have to take this seriously, and the remaining of being. This storm is not going away anytime soon. It's really happening. Evidence then is the link between meaning and being that involves me and the object both in a concrete lived experience and in an ideal unity that is, on page 61, quote, repeatable in infinitum. There is never just one happening within a life. There are always more. In fact, you may be hungry, you may be late for an appointment while we're having the webinar, right? There's not just one happening. Marvin may be tired and yawning, right? Like, I don't mean to point you out, but like all kinds of things are happening. There's always more than one event happening at the same time, right? We can intend the happening of the storm, the arrangement of things on the desk, or a past conversation with a friend, of an exciting anticipation of a date, because the way that each can present itself to us as actual is tied to or geared within a directed multiplicity of acts of intending, verifying, and possessing. The being of the thing that shows itself, that gives itself as actual, reaches us as a claim in the first place, because we are meant to intertwine our habitual evidences, our active lives, with the claims to actuality or possibility or non-actuality or impossibility of things. So I'm going to continue, if that's okay. Is that okay? Keep continuing. I'll do 28, and then we can break for questions, and then I'll do 29. So this is 28. We do not just experience individual things, moments, events, or relationships. So 28 is about a world. We also experience the relations between things, moments, events, and relations. We experience the horizons of each appearance of what claims to be actual, and the references to other past and future appearances of itself. We perceive the relations this thing here bears to all other things and to the ground of its appearance, namely the world. We are never just perceiving things finitely, delimitedly. We experience this here and now as transcending itself by means of engaging our past and future acts. Verifying the meaning of what is given entails the fact that, quote, evidences refer us, this is page 61, to infinities of evidences relating to the same object. We may not take up all these infinities of evidences, but we are given with an infinite set of possible tasks within the clarification or verification of the thing's claim to actuality. This infinite task is given even though the object is given one-sidedly. We can bring the object to our recognition, this is our act, only with respect to its self-givenness. And that self-givenness, especially in perception, is through profiles and adumbrations. Note that although Cairns translates Husserl as saying that our evidences, quote, make their object itself given with an essentially necessary one-sidedness, what Husserl actually says is that we zur Selbstgebenheit bringen. we bring forward what presents itself to our view as self-given. We bring it to self-givenness within the structure of one-sidedness. So to self-givenness, we bring it. We extend focus on receive a givenness as limited, and yet as limited, entailing infinities of further evidence and action on our behalf. The world, too, the horizon of all objects, is also given from within a partial view or profile. The world is given within a limited visibility or tactility or any other sense. The world's one-sidedness may not be the one-sidedness of a house as I walk past it, or a water bottle as I look at it on my desk. But the world, like these individual objects and referred to within our relationship to them, has, quote, a multiform horizon of unfulfilled anticipations, which, however, are in need of fulfillment. Erfüllungsbedürftige, page 61. So I'm going to make a lot out of the word need. The need is what binds the world to me through the side of the fulfilled horizons. If the world did not appear as referring to what it needs from me, I would not stick with it by means of what does in fact appear adequately or definitively. The world is what leads me from this thing to that, from this relation to that relation's ground, from this concrete appearance to that ideal law. Because through the thing, I am geared into the world as that which fulfills the horizons that I see implicated here and now in this or that. I get a sense of the whole world as I live into what is yet to be uncovered. What I am as a transcendental subject is thus a life of, quote, actualizing synthetic transitions, Übergangen, from evidence to evidence. I'm literally just moving. I am transition. I am moving, which is what the moments of time consciousness does, and it's what the moments of synthesis does. My heart is restless as a perceiver or as an experiencer. It will not rest until the end of life. And this is because of my infinite responsibility to the world that needs and calls for my fulfillment of the meanings that are implicit in what appears, to the task of having to be the one that coordinates meaning and being, that must pursue a unified, perfect, or ideal grasp of a thing and world in relation to me because of the manner of self-givenness of each thing. Being and its claim on me is dependent on me continuing to verify it. Thus, being can always, quote, not be fulfilled, page 62. The manner in which anything given is transcendent to me while being given within or immanently, the manner in which that thing appears is as tied to my ongoing function of making possible, quote, a harmonious synthesis of the thing's appearances through space and time, 62. The whole world, too, must continue to show itself, to prove itself, within my further experience of this thing and of the world itself. The world needs me. I have a purpose, an enjoyment maybe, a difficult yet meaningful task of continuing to follow this beloved wherever it leads me, as Socrates tells Euthyphro as they pursue a definition of piety. The very effort that the world's appearance requires, that is, the ongoing process of verification and of transitioning between evidence and evidence, the very effort shows the world's transcendence to me. Even though I have the world within my experience, and even though the world is thus immanent to consciousness, nevertheless the world shows itself, gives itself, as transcendent, as actual. The world in its need depends on me, even as it presents itself imperially as the very interconnection of my infinite series of possible actions of synthesis. It's like the world is Darth Vader, right? And thus the world both commands and shows itself to yield to me, since it is transcendental subjectivity that, quote, constitutes actuality of being and sense. It's like Darth Vader at that moment where he says, Luke, I am your father. Right? I recognize, bring together, and notice both sense and being. I see meaning and see claims and fulfillment of the world's being. There can only be being within a relationship of significance that is always yet to be fulfilled. Being is thus between certain and provisional. It is being that announces its own intertwining with meaning. And yet it is subjectivity which is sensitive to both meaning and being and their intertwining that can bring them together, hold them together, and proceed toward their ultimate unity without actually getting them. Transcendental subjectivity is the leadership of Moses, insofar as we are moving toward the promised land without entering it. That does not doubt the reality of the promise. It is, however, to be so wrapped up in the process of the promise that we sometimes lose sight of the interaction of world and ego. Thus, the world, particularly the world as being or actual or true, can neither be fully doubted nor fully fulfilled. The world, as Husserl says, page 62, quote, is an infinite idea related to infinities of harmoniously combinable experiences, end quote. Lest this make it sound like the world never really gets off the ground, however, we should attend to how the world has always already geared into us. The world calls for, needs us to achieve, quote, a perfect experiential evidence. That's page 62. The world is given to us as geared into us by means of announcing its partnership with a future perfect that can never have come. We are toward the world as we are toward ourselves. We are in the world as we are in ourselves. All right, so that's 27 and 28. I want to take a pause and see if you have things to say, and then move on to 29. Go ahead, Marvin.
Yeah, thank you. It's wonderful and clarifying, and it adds a whole extra layer that I didn't get in reading it. One thing that occurs to me is this, does he actually say kind of like the purpose of life or experience is this ongoing dance with the world of tracking the evolution of evidences and towards some hypothetical resolution? Something sort of like that, I think. But I was thinking that that's true as far as like conscious life, but I mean, a person can go inward and choose to not engage with that ongoing chasing the synthesis. And, you know, it's obviously very important, but to say it's the purpose of life seems a bit of a stretch. And this may or may not be related to a second question I have, which might be way outside of the scope of this class, but I recently have read more about Kyoto School and how they interacted with Heidegger, and at least from the probably third party, third level sources I've read about it, it seems like they're attempting to talk about Zen experience in Western philosophical phenomenological terms. Is that related to this idea of purpose, or even Olga's thing? Because Zen people do train on attention and things. Or is it something that you're not that much into?
I can't speak to the Kyoto and to the relationship to Zen very much at all. What I can say is that, and I may be wrong, but we can make the world pretty small in terms of our own lives. Like we can decide not to attend to lots of different things, right?
Right.
And so that doesn't get rid of the basic structure of world. That simply creates the limits within which we are going to exercise our phenomenological hermeneutics, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and people make those decisions all the time in very many kinds of ways because one has one life. And although
Right.
one always has infinite possibilities that are opened up by every meaningful encounter, nevertheless, you take one and that cuts off all these others. And then, right? So it's always this sort of essential structure of following through. And I think even in Zen, if I'm paying attention to how, like my own breathing, and I'm allowing myself to sort of deconnect to things that are taking up my time, as it were, taking up the
Mm-hmm.
space of my life, I'm still, this is where I get a little unclear, but I still think of myself as participating in the meaning or the intertwining of what I am and what presents itself to me. I don't know. I'm not sure at that point, because then if there's nothingness, and then I don't know what to say anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I think insofar as we are attending to meaning as unfolding of events within consciousness, that is, within immanence, I think we're committed to this project, would be Husserl's point.
Yeah, yeah. This is I see this as definitely in the sphere of what he calls intentionality. So the kind of, I guess the question is there uh, some kind of uh, cognitive experience of intention with less intentionality, or even a suspension of intentionality?
I think so,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I am pushing Husserl closer to Heidegger's being in the world, right? So I'm
Mm.
intentionally trying to read it so that lots of things like trace or being in the world or Dasein are possible readings of
Mm-hmm.
Husserl, and not simply, you know, coming out of nowhere. Like they're coming out of whatever this, and I'm maybe over highlighting the word need in this section. But if
Mm.
the world is within me but needs from me, that's
Mm-hmm.
how it might maintain itself while being also intimately connected. That to me is interesting, because I don't know if I said the word purpose or not, but I certainly agree with you that there is a kind of purposefulness then in phenomenology. There is a kind of
Mm-hmm.
responsibility or duty or religious experience or something.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I don't
Meaning
I don't know what more to do with
life.
that, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Are you all okay if I keep going? I don't want to lose you or ruin the wonderful conversations that we're having simply by droning on and on, but I guess I will if no one wants to say, yeah, Julia, go ahead.
It's a small question from 27. What does ideal imminence mean?
So, yeah, that's a good question. Go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you. Did you want to? So the only way that I could make sense of the world as a whole is not through actual concrete being able to have a coloring page in my book where I've scouted out all references of the world and put them in relation to one another and have a full model, right, or a full understanding. So the ideal would be having the world sketched out in its systems of interconnections in a way that makes sense of the whole. And that will never be fully adequate for me. I will never be fully adequate to it, but its presence as ideal in consciousness is that motivation to keep uncovering for myself what is concretely specific in that ideal having of the whole. That's how I would understand it.
So it's ideal insofar as you're seeking to complete this picture eventually?
Yes, and it's the having of the whole picture before you actually have it, in a way. Kind of like you have the whole house as you're walking. You have the front of the house, really, you have one profile, but that profile draws you to the experience in that moment of the whole house, to which you'd have to walk around if you wanted to see all sides of it. Yes, so I think so.
If I could just add a little bit, I think what he's talking about this very basic question of the relationship of reality to consciousness. And he says reality, the world, is in consciousness. But it's not the case that things in the world are literally contained in thoughts in the way, something could be in a box in the world, for example, or even the way a cause relates to an effect in the world. So that's really key. And I think here he's pointing at least one aspect of it, which is if I know any one thing, that implies an infinite further synthesis of appearings of that thing and of that thing in relationship to everything conceivable. And so it's not the set of all relations in the world, it's the set of intentional acts that are appearings and that constitute the presence of things to me. And those are not the same. And so I think I don't know if that helps, but I think that's maybe another way of putting what he means by ideal immanence.
I think that's right. And the only thing that I would say in addition to what you said, Jeremy, is that it's both. It's both the implicit references that all the things have to each other, and it's all of the references that each thing and all of its references to other things makes to my future and past acts. So both are true, but that's what world is, right? World is embedded in me by reason of always referring to my actions that I cannot take yet, or have whatever. And also, the reason it refers to all those actions that I cannot take yet is because they're already mapped onto, in terms of possibility, the sides or the other objects that are implicit in this one. So that's why world is not a thing. You're right. World is not a thing. World is possibility insofar as it is both series of relations of things and series of relations of me to things and to world.
But all of those relations themselves appear. So it's always also, and so the question would be, what is the immanence of those relations among worldly relations, among worldly things to consciousness? And that, I think that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
It's that sense of immanence.
Yes, I think that's right. Muhammad, yes.
So just like when you talk about this whole and givenness, is it more like this whole is really defined as a boundary? There is a boundary, and is also this boundary is also is a reflective of that sort of maybe bracketing is the boundary. Then within this boundary, I may start expanding. I may look into sort of its constituent and sort of better understand it, and then the meaning of that emerges, and in some way maybe this boundary is now expands too as the meaning emerges in the form of a transcendence as well. Am I using these words in any meaningful way into sentences?
Yes, I think you are. Olga, you look like you're about to say you need to go. You can't hear you. You're muted.
I'm trying to avoid being big black nothing.
Okay. We're all trying. I think, Muhammad, you're absolutely right. I think there is the world will never be finite, right? So in a sense, it is in infinities, as Jeremy was saying, infinities of evidences, infinities of relations, and yet the world does present a boundary to me between me and it, and of me to myself. Even though it is within me, the world is not me, or else I wouldn't know it, right? It would not appear to me. So there is a certain sense in which being immanent by way of pointing me to all of my actions and to all of the relations, which, as Jeremy said quite rightly, appear, there is still this boundary between my act of perceiving and the object that is perceived. And in some cases, that is world. So yes, this infinite world within an infinite transcendental ego is the presentation of a boundary or a limit or a distinction, which is the very energy of experience. I don't know if that answers your thing, but that's what I heard you saying. As Jeremy said, it's not like something in a box. We will never dissolve the world into our knowing of the world. We will never dissolve the knowing of a thing or the experience of the thing. Otherwise, it would never present itself as not me. If we could dissolve things into our perceptions or knowing of them, they would cease to present themselves. They would cease to appear.
So thank you so much. That was very helpful. One other thing I want to just kind of ask you, you mentioned something about almost an impossibility of sort of computer in sort of its computational limit. Can you just elaborate on that? Just I didn't entirely understood the point.
For a computer, this is what I'm no expert. You're the expert on this, and you can critique me if you would like. But if Husserl is right, then consciousness is not hardware. Consciousness is not the brain, right? Consciousness is not some disembodied mind. It is a relationship in which the world is present within it, and the modes by which it recognizes what is given reflect an a priori and ongoing pre-established relationship with that world. So my supposition, which you could tell me if it's wrong, is that AI or a computer treats knowing as already separate. Here I am trying to translate, if I'm the computer, trying to translate what it is I'm looking at into code that I can manipulate. So it operates from a natural attitude prejudice of this is over here, and I, the knowing program, am over here, and there's a gap. And until I translate what this is into something that I know, I don't know it. Whereas what Husserl is describing in terms of passive synthesis and consciousness is that I am already embedded in the world, and I have done that without actually doing anything to reflectively engage coding the world. So the infant learns to walk or learns to speak or learns to eat or whatever by always already having within herself the capacity to be embedded in that world. Otherwise, the infant would not do those things prior to reflection, right? The infant is not coding the world into her. She is responding to the call of the world to pull herself up on the chair. So that's me trying to make sense very basically of why this will never, representing the brain as a series of external processes will never actually be the same as consciousness considered phenomenologically.
Interesting. I think so. The capacity, I think, it seems to be a very integral part of the position that you're taking, and that capacity is somewhat a priori in the formulation you.
Yes, in a passive way, right? It's passively prior.
When you say how does the word how does passive qualify this? In what aspect is passive? When you say passive in a sense that it hasn't tapped into it?
Not all modes of consciousness are modes of self-consciousness. That's what I mean by passive. And he'll say that in the fifth meditation. I'm just telling you that's what I understand it to mean. Whereas I don't think there will be an AI that would have a mode of consciousness that was not also a mode of self-consciousness. That is, it has to be formulating the code by which it understands the thing. So every single thing that AI knows, it knows by means of very reflective engagement with its own way of translation. It's almost like somebody learning a second language, right? So when you learn a second language, it's very different from learning a first language. When you learn a second language, you have to study all of the grammar, you have to study all of the vocabulary, you have to begin to piece things together. People laugh at me when I try to speak Italian or when I try to speak German. They say what a terrible job I do or whatever. And we laugh a lot and we get over it. And I just continue to falter away until I, study enough and placed enough. And then but my first language, I don't have to do that, right? It's like swimming in water. It's breathing air. It's just language happens in me. And so for me, AI or whatever is always going to be at the level of absolutely reflective, step-by-step, right, translation of something outside of me. Marvin.
I really resonate with your example of native language learning versus learning as an adult. And in AI, I think that they categorize two quite radically different techniques that kind of correspond to this and also to what you call this self-reflectiveness. The term they use there is knowledge representation. So early AI was very big on knowledge representation, and they had some successes, but it really wasn't up to the task of full fluid language learning and translation. Rather, the other approach, a non-representational approach, is actually modeled on neural networks. So actually, the system itself doesn't have an internal knowledge. In a very vague sense, it has a knowledge representation, but it's like an enormous matrix of correlation coefficients to other points in the matrix. And so there's no fixed knowledge representation like in the past. Representational AI, to do a triangle, they would say, okay, here's XY coordinates, so and so and so and so and so and so. There's really nothing like that. In non-representational, you'd give examples of triangles and it kind of scans it, and then you label them and say, okay, this is a triangle, that's a dog. Here's another triangle. Here's a car, whatever. And it just forms that. And this is actually part of the reason why it's so hard for current generation non-representational AIs to give explanations. This is actually an area of current research. Why, how to get the AI to tell it how it came to this conclusion. And also it's related to, I think, to the problem with hallucination. It doesn't have the self-reflection to really distinguish between hallucinating or not. It's, but yeah.
That's right. Any other thoughts? This is really helpful. Okay, well, I'm going to push on unless I'm stopped. I'm sort of like an AI that just keeps going. So this is section 29. And this, I think, continues what Jeremy was talking about before. It's material and formal ontological regions, so whole regions of things in their interconnection, as indexes pointing to transcendental systems of evidence. So the notion of index for Husserl is one of the most important ways in which he talks about intentionality as the intertwining of subject and object. Husserl now focuses on how we as phenomenologists really have the task of, quote, self-explication, page 62. So this is like Marvin, this is what you were just talking about, really, you and Muhammad. Truth and being for us are, quote, a structural differentiation among the infinite multiplicities of actual and possible cogitaciones or experiences. That's page 63. That is, we are explicating our larger selves, our transcendental subjectivity, as the intertwining of subject and object by means of how the object announces itself. If the object is given to us as actual or existing, as making claims to those, then we have the event of having a structure, a differentiation, a moving forward of a system of responsibility, of response, of actions of synthesis. And I guess to Julia's question, that's really what I think it means to have the ideal in consciousness, is to have a set of responsibilities.
Yeah, we are okay.
We are called up to play in the interplay, and our script, while not given in detail, has a kind of plot, a kind of determinacy that moves us forward toward the sense or meaning that animates this claim to being, actuality, and truth. To experience, quote, an actually existing object, end quote, is to be pointed toward, quote, a particular system of evidences relating to the object and belonging together. That's page 63. The storm, or the lamp on the desk, and its halo of light within the darkened room, each points us toward further evidences that, quote unquote, belong together in a particular way. So if we talked about reality before as not conflicting, now we have this notion of belonging to reflect on. As I move from each evidence to the next that belongs with it, I uncover a path towards and an appearance of, quote, total evidence. And Julia, this total evidence may be ideal as well. That's page 63. If I want to verify the quality of the lamp or whether I can increase its brightness, I can look over it for a switch, check the bulb, etc. To verify the storm, I can look up, listen, feel the rain, search for other cars on the road that might be pulled over, check the looks on people's faces, consult a weather report, etc. The very fitting together of evidences, of experiences and sides of the object, of horizons and actual sides within view, are the force of the claim of actuality within which the object is given. The total evidence is given with the object, or at least the indication of the total evidence, the givenness of the total as reachable in principle from within each particular evidence. Certainly, Husserl clarifies the total evidence as, quote, an absolutely perfect evidence, page 63, in which, quote, unfulfilled expectant intention is addressed and could, quote, attain adequate fulfillment, page 63. It is an ideal. No object, event, other person, or relation, or world can be given from all sides at once. The world will not be exhausted and made fully transparent. If that were true, transcendence could never appear in the first place, as transcendence is simply the not yet fulfilled character of what is given. What we can do in transcendental phenomenology, Husserl says, is not actually follow up on every unfulfilled intention. What we can do is work to, quote, clear up the dimensions of infinity that make up systematically the ideal infinite synthesis of this evidence. That's page 63. Dimensions of infinity. To any perceived object, such as the lamp on the desk, we can show that the adequately fulfilled experience of the lamp would require an infinite number of points of view simultaneously. To any event, such as the storm, the absolutely adequate and fulfilled ideal synthesis would entail not just an infinity of orientations, but also an infinite succession of moments, even in a limited event like a storm, of full attention. We cannot reach the total evidence that is the very motor behind the experience of the object or the world as actually existing. But again, the total evidence is somewhat like the promised land. It can structure our lives as pursuers of reality and truth by means of setting up practices, traditions, attentions, services, etc. We do not only need to pursue particular objects or even the ideal object as such, Husserl says. In a sense, the particular lived experience does not show enough of the infinite that the transcendental subject is already working with. This is the reason for staying mostly with eidetic structures, the way in which he stays largely with the, quote, concept of any object as such, page 63. The infinities are more visible in the object as such. Nevertheless, the examples of the lamp and the storm are defensible, I think, by virtue of the way in which they make infinite demands of space and time. Like infinite orientations, infinite series of moments. That would be the total evidence of either one of them. That we handle them within a limited orientation and a limited span of attention. Like if I always had to make an infinite number of recognitions to figure out a storm is coming, I would be dead, right? But that we do so in a limited span of attention is only possible because we are used to working with a delimited sphere of infinities that we do not need to make explicit, as we are having this experience within a life that moves on its own toward other things and other events. We are used, that is, to dealing with the expectant implicit horizon of co-subjects, each of us in the webinar, who stand in for the perspectives and the moments we do not see or live explicitly. Like Muhammad and Marvin stand in for AI and what Peter doesn't know about them or about Zen. Julia stands in for logic, perhaps about what the ideal might mean in other senses. Jeremy stands in for, pieces of Husserl that Peter didn't emphasize or whatever. And I don't mean that in a negative way for any of you. It's like that we do. That's why we have a webinar. We don't just have Peter just gesticulating wildly on film, right? We have actual things where we talk to one another. Without moving forward from the operative toward the properly philosophical, that is the shared intersubjective, we cannot ground the operative. We are used to dealing with the expectant implicit horizon of co-subjects who stand in for the perspectives and the moments we do not see or live explicitly. If we didn't do that, we couldn't have world. We operate by means of allowing each other to stand in for the moments or the perspectives we can't now see. We operate with infinities, as we do in calculus, without necessarily understanding how and why we are doing what we are doing. That may be more about my biography than your abilities, but when I did calculus twice, I didn't understand it. I could do it. I could figure out what to do with the infinities. I had no idea why they were infinities or what that even meant, but maybe you're all better mathematicians. I'm sure you're better mathematicians than I am. Husserl moves from object to regions of objects in order to make clearer to us how the kind of object given, as well as its mode of givenness, carves out infinities of evident synthesis differently. It is not just object or even world as such that we need to clarify in the linking together of meaning and being. Rather, we need to look at, quote, a constitutional theory of physical nature, of the human, of human community, of culture, and other regions. That's page 63. And I know that Olga mentioned this before. We are already prepared for regions of objects and not just particular objects. Operating within structures of preparation, expectation, and capacity to recognize objects within a region is one way in which we are available to hear the claim of the world to actuality. The object is not just the object, it is an object within a region, and a region is what it is within a world of regions. In terms of each region, we would then attend to the theory, which is the way we formalize what we already are doing, by means of, quote, uncovering the intentionality implicit in the experience itself as a transcendental process, or what that last part is transzendentalen Erlebnis, a transcendental experience or lived experience. So we uncover the intentionality implicit in each experience as a transcendental experience. So Olga asked a question at the beginning about the a priori, and I said the a priori was intuitable. This is one of those places where he really says that, right? Each experience is also a transcendental lived experience. And the lived experience in the transcendental realm is the experience of the structure, the a priori set of intentional relations. We have transcendental lived experiences. We experience regions like human community, not this one, but any one. We experience this essence as intentional, that is, as intertwining its sense with our acts as the ground of its appearance as actual. We experience the human as such, culture as such, nature as such. This means we can see the avenues unrolling before us in each case. We see, quote, the pre-delineative horizons, page 64, that each region announces. We see the method of uncovering further meanings of the region by allowing it to direct our attention, our activity. We uncover what it means for humans to belong to a community, to form something that is neither a super subject nor a simple summation. And then we pursue the differences between that and culture by means of active or passive constitution. We further become alive to how we are prepared for our recognition of objects and regions by means of, quote, non-objective, merely subjective objects, page 64. Some of these non-objective objects are the flow of immanent temporality, the objectivity that I am myself within myself without being an object for myself. This is where he says that. my quote, flowing life that constitutes itself in and for itself. It's page 64. Is itself an object without being an object. It's a non-objective object. It's just pause and let that sink in that he has said you have a non-objective object. Okay. You have a subjective object. I don't know which one is worse, but both of them are true for him. I sense it at the edges while it is in process and can verify it by living it. So Olga's initial question, right, about passive synthesis, about the a priori, about evidence of the passive synthesis, in some sense, that has structured this whole meditation. So her question was right. I sense my internal flowing life, my internal temporality, as that which is an object for me without being an object. It is something that I live, and I verify it by my life. Just like I sense my temporality as self-constituting, in the sense that I do not will each moment to come and to pass. So it's self-constituting, but without my recognizing it, except as an anonymous layer of what I am, thus as something like an object to my transcendental reflection. This sense of non-objective object is called up to make clear what objects are as such, and I employ this merely subjective sense of objects in order to see how it is possible for the immanent to be also beyond me, to be transcendent in its claims and in its gearing into my syntheses of evidence. All right. That is it for section 29. We have a few minutes before I have to go. Would you like to say anything or comment or redirect? I don't think we'll start the fourth today.
Well, just a comment that for me, a very interesting part is in the footnote, which is maybe foreshadowing the later part where he talks about the single subjectivity and intersubjectivity, and empathies lie within the immanency that belongs to me as ego of the reduction. So I'm taking this as like really privileging this type of experience to warrant, it's privileged enough to warrant a separate category beyond single subjectivity. And so that's interesting.
I really like that you mentioned that, Marvin. Christos, thank you so much. I want you to stay as long as you can, but I'm really grateful that next week you'll be willing to take on 34 to 38. We're really excited because that's getting us closer to what Marvin's talking about. Did you want to say anything, Christos, before you left?
No. Well, great. It's just that I would also like to sort of sit and mull with it, but I have to go before to 9 my time, to your time. So yeah.
All right. Well, take care. It was nice to see you.
Likewise. All good wishes, dear Olga.
Thank you. So